Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a field-forward podcast. I'm David Geiger, your host. I've been on Iowa TV and radio for the last decade, and I am excited to join you on this podcast, Farm Here Daily. Today on the program, we're going to talk with someone who won a World Food Prize Foundation award here in Iowa. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And the World Food Prize Foundation announced earlier this month Ann McGlynn of Tapestry Farms in Davenport, Iowa, is the recipient of the 2025 Robert D. Ray Iowa Shares Humanitarian Award. She is recognized for her leadership in advancing sustainable food access throughout the Quad Cities, where her nonprofit reclaimed underutilized land to grow more than 20,000 pounds of fresh, culturally relevant produce, strengthening local food systems and nourishing communities in need. Ann McGlynn now joins us on Farm Here Daily. Thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on your award.
Thanks so much. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. In your own words, can you describe what you do? I know I just kind of described what you do, but what's your side of it?
Yeah, so Tapestry Farms is a nonprofit urban farm system, and we work with refugees who come to live here in the Quad Cities. So the way I like to talk about it is we do three things. We grow food. We have about a dozen sites throughout the Quad Cities, both seasonal sites where we grow, April through October or so. And then we have one hydroponic site, which is a refurbished shipping container in Rock Island. And that allows us to grow year-round, mostly leafy greens and root vegetables. We hire refugees as part of that work. This year, we've got about 4 people who are refugees who are working for us. We also have farm interns, which is that's pretty fun to help shape the future of farming in our state, hopefully. And we grow a variety of things. We grow things that Americans would normally think of from a seasonal farm, peppers and tomatoes and those types of vegetables. But then we also grow culturally specific foods. So we grow a leafy green known as muchicha or lenga-lenga. We grow indori, which is an eggplant that people who come from, say, East and Central Africa really enjoy. And then a variety of different zucchinis and other eggplants as well. The second thing we do is we offer social services supports for refugee families in our community. We serve people who come from Afghanistan, Syria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Haiti, Burundi, Rwanda. And so we help with housing and education, finding work, meeting basic needs, helping people getting driver's licenses, and then if they so choose, becoming U.S. citizens. And then the last thing we do is we're working to build our community's welcoming infrastructure so that people who come to the Quad Cities, whether they're an immigrant or a refugee or not, feel welcome and embraced here. Obviously, our work centers on refugees, so those are the systems we are working on most of all, but we want everyone who comes to the Quad Cities to feel welcome.
All three of those sound really interesting, and I'd like to dig into them. But before I do so, I did want to just ask about the history of Tapestry Farms,
Sure.
because it's only been around for less than a decade. Why'd you decide to do this?
So back in 2016, I worked at a large church here in the Quad Cities, St. Paul Lutheran, and the senior pastor came to my office and said, hey, I would really like to get our church involved in working with a refugee family who's resettling here. So he asked if I knew how or who to get a hold of to do that, and I did. And her name was Amy Rowell, and she ran the World Relief office here in the Quad Cities. They're our local resettlement agency. And so we connected with World Relief. We collected household items over the summer of 2016 And then in the fall of 2016, September to be exact, we welcomed a refugee family of 7 from Democratic Republic of Congo, a mom with 6 kids. And as we walked alongside them, we learned that it's pretty difficult for refugee families resettling anywhere, really, but for us here in the Quad Cities. But then we also learned that sometimes refugees come to the United States with very significant agricultural skills. And so we put that all together. And in June of 2017, so 8 years ago, I filed the paperwork to start Tapestry Farms.
Wow. So, fun fact, and this goes into my next question here. I actually was a missionary kid myself. I lived in Brazil for about 4 years. My family went there when I was about 13 years old, and so I know personally the concept of being in a different country
Mm.
and not having foods that you typically had readily available. What does it do to help or support these refugees in the US when you see them getting access to foods that they normally didn't have access to?
Yeah. So, oftentimes when a refugee comes to the Quad Cities, everything is unfamiliar. Language is unfamiliar, customs are unfamiliar, um, holidays, school, work, everything is unfamiliar. And so, growing food, um, growing food that is familiar to families just brings a little bit of joy. Obviously, nutrition. We talk about nutrition security rather than food security. And also just an acknowledgement, at least a little bit, that you belong here. You can find the things that are familiar to you here, even though you are so very far from home. And so that's a lot of the reason why we grow things that are familiar.
Another aspect of that as well is you mentioned a couple different African crops or are they, I assumed, are vegetables or are they fruits?
Yes. Yeah,
Vegetables.
vegetables. Yep. Yep.
You mentioned a couple of those. How well do they grow in Iowa soil?
So there are some things that we cannot grow unless
Okay.
we have like a greenhouse. So sugarcane we cannot grow. Um, Cassava is another popular crop. Our growing season's not long enough for that, but
Mm.
the things that do grow here grow very, very well. So we'll talk about indori. Indori is a African eggplant. It's white. It's about the size of an apple, give a smaller apple, give or take. It it grows exceedingly well here. Lenga lenga or muchicha is a leafy green, and it actually is considered to be a weed by people, say, like my dad, who's an Iowa farmer. But to people that we work with, it's a very favored leafy green. It also happens to be highly nutritious. And so being able to grow that and provide that is pretty awesome. So, um, and then this last year, we welcomed people onto staff who are from Syria. And so they've selected a couple of varieties of zucchini and other types of eggplant to grow this year. So it's going to be pretty fun to watch those and become acquainted with those.
And when you were starting Tapestry Farms and working on this project, did you ever expect to receive this Iowa Shares Humanitarian Award, the Robert D. Ray Iowa Shares Humanitarian Award?
No, never. Actually, I went to the Iowa Hunger Summit a couple of years ago, and I never thought, it never crossed my mind ever. And actually, I previously have declined when people have asked to nominate me for awards. It's really lovely, but I said yes to this one for a couple of reasons. Robert Ray was an incredible human being, and I get to do this work, and my colleagues get to do this work because of him. He said yes to wanting to bring people from Laos to Iowa to rebuild their lives, and worked with the federal government to create the mechanism and system to do that. And then that resulted in the refugee resettlement program being established in 1980. And it was bipartisan. Robert Ray was a Republican, Jimmy Carter was a Democrat, and everybody worked together to make this happen. And so um, that piece of it right there, because of him, um, so many years later, I'm able to do this work, and countless other people across the state are able to do this work of welcome, which is so important. Then on top of that, he worked to feed people here in Iowa, but also overseas after visiting refugee camps there in the late 70s. And so just the combination of those two things, and his urging of all of us to not just say you want to help people, um, to think that you want to help people, but actually do that work, to actually sink into it, and put your skills and talents to work helping others, is pretty meaningful. He has um, he fundamentally changed our state for the better, and I hold him in very high regard.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
You are listening to Farm Here Daily. We will continue our conversation with Ann in just a moment, but first let's take a look at the marketplace. And there was a negative trade at the end of the session on Friday. July corn 4 3/4 cents weaker, 4.28 3/4, with September falling 3.5 cents at 4.25.5. Soybeans in July 6 3/4 cents down at 10.68, with August falling 5 1/4 at 10.71.5. Soybean meal in July 80 cents a ton, in the red at $284.10. July wheat 6.5 cents lower, 5.67 3/4. September falling 7 cents at 5.83.5. And looking into the livestock market close, it was a bit more mixed there. Cattle though in the red. June live cattle $1.27, a hundredweight lower, 223.02, with August falling $1.85 at 209.82. Feeder cattle in August $1.72 weaker at $302.45, with September falling $1.57 at $302.22 a hundredweight. Lean hogs in July 60 cents a hundredweight in the green at $112.77, with August rising 45 cents at $112.45. That is the Friday market close. This is Farm Here Daily. We're speaking with Ann McGlynn, founder and executive director of Tapestry Farms in Davenport, Iowa. She's also the recipient of the 2025 Robert D. Ray Iowa Shares Humanitarian Award. And we were just speaking about the Robert D. Ray and his impact on Iowa. Taking that to today, there's definitely plenty of controversy and conflict when it comes to that as a whole. And I don't really want to dig into the controversial side. I just want to dig from your side on what you've seen with the folks working over in Davenport and the Quad Cities. How have these skilled people in farming been able to contribute here?
Yeah, so one of the best things about our work is that we're able to put the skills and talents of people who come here as refugees to work, bettering our community, growing food for others, and bringing joy to others. Some of the people who come to work for us spent their whole lives in gardens, growing food for themselves and others to eat. Some people are brand new to gardening, and it is so fun to watch our colleagues and the volunteers who come. We have about 300 or so volunteers who come every year in groups to help, usually either plant or harvest / tear down for the year. Nobody wants to weed in July. Um, and it is so fun to watch everyone work together to grow food in places that maybe you think food can't be grown on. So one of our plots, for example, we've built up. We've built it with raised beds and berms because there's an entire building buried underneath the plot. It burned in the mid-90s and they just collapsed it into the ground. The land sat empty for decades, and now it's this beautiful place with fruit trees, and this year we're growing tomatoes there, and it's a place where people can come and sit and enjoy. We also have a natives plantings and pollinator plantings berm there, and it's just so wonderful to watch land that people previously thought didn't mean much or couldn't ever be anything in the future, grow food to nourish our community, and to watch people who come here as refugees be a part of that in some really meaningful ways.
Jumping off of that, let's talk about the mechanics of the farms that you work with over there. You have a bunch of locations.
Yep.
Is it 11 or 12?
I would have to count exactly. I think we've got about a dozen.
Right. And I really want to jump to the hydroponics one, but I'm going to save that one for last.
Yeah.
The outdoors farms that you're working with, how much fruit and vegetables do you grow on those?
Yeah, so it's mostly vegetables. Last year we grew total across all of our sites, including the hydroponics, about 11,000 pounds. We planted fruit trees about 3 years ago, so we're hoping that this year we might get some fruit out of that. And then we actually just planted a second site with it'll have a total of 6 fruit trees. We just planted that site a few weeks ago. So most of what we grow is vegetables. And so last year was about 11,000 pounds. And this year we haven't really set a goal, but obviously we would like to grow a little bit more at least than we did last year.
What type of acreage is this? How much space are you using for that?
Yeah, so as a person who grew up on a small family farm in Iowa that is 189 acres, I should probably know how many acres my own farm is. I don't. Here's what I can tell you. Our smallest plot is in Rock Island. It's a raised bed site with 8 beds that are each about 4 by 8. That's our smallest site in West Rock Island. Our largest site is at St. Paul, which is the church I used to work at. That's 2 plots. One is probably about 50 by 50. And another one is, I don't know, maybe 125 or 150 by 75. That's our largest. And we've got everything in between. So I don't have a total. I should
That's
probably
okay.
figure that out someday.
I think the point that I was kind of getting across there then is that you aren't using acres and acres and acres. This is all stuff that, could be easily set aside in many different cities around the country.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I will say each site has a water source that when someone approaches us about a piece of land and farming, first I first I look at proximity. Just because we are at so many sites, we do need to stay pretty close in the Quad Cities. The second question I ask is, what's the water source? And so, and then we test the soil to make sure everything is good with the soil. So if those three things are in place, they're all good, then yeah, you can pretty much grow food anywhere.
I think that's a common thing. A lot of folks who aren't in the agriculture space don't realize is how varied soil types are. So is that
Yeah.
soil test really important?
It is, not just to know all of the nutrients and the levels in the soil, but we also, just because we are in an urban setting, we want to make sure that there's no toxins in the soil that would be harmful to people.
Now I get to jump into the fun part. I've always been fascinated by hydroponics, and you guys have, I believe, a shipping container with it.
It
Can you
is.
talk about that?
Sure. It's 320 square feet, and we can grow year round in it. It's vertical growing, and it's mostly leafy greens and vegetables. So, variety of lettuces, Swiss chard, arugula. We our hydroponics manager Sonia just started to grow flowers in there, and she's tried a variety of carrots that grow well. So I think we'll grow maybe about 2,000 pounds of food, maybe a little bit more this year. But it's pretty amazing to watch the system and how it works. Obviously, all water based, there's no soil with nutrients, and it's highly controlled, which is a great environment to grow food in because the plants know exactly what to expect, and it's geared towards the exact environment that's best for the type of vegetables we're growing. So it's pretty fun to watch how plants can emerge from just water. Um, and the growing cycle is about 7 or 8 weeks long, depending on the plant. So it is a shortened cycle, which is also pretty nice.
That is incredible. How do you keep it warm during the winter?
There's an HVAC unit on it, and the lights create heat within the unit. But where there are, temperature variations, the HVAC unit kicks in.
And before we go, I just want to talk about one last thing, and that is the overall feeling and impact of World Food Prize Foundation, Iowa Hunger Summit, and your own Tapestry Farms, and the importance of contributing and adding food and the story of food into this refugee crisis, we sometimes call it, or sometimes it's just, it's just a church helping out. Can you tell me a little bit about your feelings and thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in terms of this award, as I mentioned earlier, it's just extremely meaningful to me personally. Um, the joy of this is that more people get to know about our work and think about, not just in Iowa but elsewhere, how individuals and organizations can try to help contribute food so that people don't go hungry. And I think one of the most important things that I hope people will take away from seeing our work through this award is that um, it's not difficult to grow food. If I can grow food, growing up, my family's farm, I didn't want anything to do with farming. I was going to move to New York and be a famous writer. If I can grow food, anybody can grow food. And I do think that growing our own food is one of the most important ways to alleviate hunger in our state and in our nation. And so my hope is that more people will be inspired to do what they can to not only grow food for themselves, but for others. We're in Iowa. We have some of the richest and best soil in all of the world. And I firmly believe that we should be using every nook and cranny possible in our state, every every lawn that's green grass currently, or places that have just been vacant for years. How can we as a state mobilize to grow food in those spaces so that everyone can be fed with nutrient dense food?
And one last note, if folks were interested in listening and wanted to contribute or help out or volunteer, do any of that stuff with the nonprofits involved in this, are there some websites or some places they could go to do that?
Sure. Obviously, if you're in the Quad Cities, tapestryfarms.org is our website. We have an amazing volunteer coordinator. If you want to help out at any of our sites, she can get you hooked up. But there are organizations throughout our state who are doing this work. Waterloo has just some really amazing people growing food there. Des Moines. So there are organizations doing work throughout the state who are growing food. I want to go back to your question you asked me right before this too. I talked about food, but I also want to recognize that our whole entire country is built on the concept of people coming to the United States for a better future. My own ancestors came from Ireland and from Germany, and one of my ancestors didn't know how to read or write and was fleeing the potato famine. And I think the more that we all recognize the incredibleness that immigrants and refugees bring to our community and the richness, the better off we all are. And so refugee resettlement is currently paused. We have hope that it will come back soon. And so I just encourage everyone in our state to either start growing a garden or connect with a refugee or immigrant family to help bring that richness alive in our state.
And I really appreciate those words, and I really appreciate you joining us as well. Ann McGlynn is the founder and executive director of Tapestry Farms in Davenport, Iowa. She's also the recipient of the 2025 Robert D. Ray Iowa Shares Humanitarian Award. Thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Thanks again, Ann. We appreciate it. This is Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. In order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So share it with your friends, follow the podcast, and check out our social media at Field Forward Pod. Additionally, you can find me on social media at Geiger Reports. You can also see me on TV, WHO Channel 13, every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I hope you all have a great weekend. I'll be back on Monday.